What's up, Penn State fans? It is a brand new edition of BWI Live. It's Wednesday, July 22nd. That is Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. The countdown to kickoff for Penn State football continues. We're inside of the 50-day mark, have been for a few days now, as the Nittany Lions get ready to soon head to Chicago for Big Ten Media Days, which will unofficially kick off the first season of the Matt Campbell era at Penn State. T. Frank, big show coming up today. We're going to get into some players who have a lot to gain from fall camp. We're going to look ahead to those media days next week. We're going to get to some of your questions. So we have some already. If you have some for us, leave them in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. We'll have some best bets as well. T. Frank, football season is almost here, but talking season continues. You ready to get talking?
Yes, I am ready. And here's the thing is, like, you said that, Nate has said that, Fitz said that last week. I think talking season is important. As somebody who talking season is all year round for me.
It is.
I don't see a difference. Like, it's a different part of the conversation. Like, yes, are there more or less facts? Are there more or less news of things happening at one year or another, at one point of the year or another? But, like, it doesn't mean that the things that we aren't talking about aren't valid. Like,
right.
We're doing a great job of setting the table. We have a lot of time to, like, put the fork in the right spot, make sure the dishes are at a right angle and all that stuff, and then, like, we'll get to it actually in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so here's how I put it on the Lions Den message board yesterday over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I'm 100% in agreement with you. The quote-unquote talking season does go year-round. I'm just ready to talk about actual pads on, actual whistles blowing.
Yeah.
We have reached the point, you and I were just talking about it off air, and it's actually funny. The chat is kind of in that same mindset as well. I think someone mentioned, like, the pre-show convo was the top 5 running backs in Penn State history, like the Mount Rushmore of Penn State running backs, and that is a July 22nd pre-show topic for sure.
Yeah.
I am ready for it to be about Matt Campbell's press conference notes and about what we're learning from practice and what the team looks like as it gets ready for the first season of Matt Campbell's time here in State College. But alas, we're going to get you through that with another BWI Live. So T. Frank, let's dive right into it. Penn State is now less than a week away from heading to Big Ten Media Days in Chicago. Those are next Tuesday through Thursday, in Chicago. Penn State goes on day 1, which is Tuesday. We don't have a full schedule yet, but we know Becht, Tony Rojas, and Anthony Danko will join Matt Campbell there. What are you most interested in learning from that group, T. Frank? Let's start with Matt Campbell and what you want to learn from him. Then we'll dive into the players. But we have heard from Matt Campbell, I think most recently was spring ball, if I'm not mistaken. And we've heard from some players throughout the summer, heard from Reed Kagi, the strength coach, about a month ago, roughly. But at this point, it's been a while since Matt Campbell's talked, so there are plenty of avenues for you to go down. What are you most interested in?
Just a progress update. He mentioned the 12 weeks, and it's important for players to develop in the critical areas that he wants them to develop in, and the staff wants them to develop in. So, just the general questions of who has done the best job of that at the moment that he thinks. Where does he think overall they've developed, and any of the things, if you can get past the kind of the generic answers, and I don't mean that, like, we talked about this before. Matt Campbell is a culture guy and believes in the culture answer. And yet there are some specifics that, if you ask him some specific questions, he'll give you some specific answers. It's just like, do you have the right phrasing for the question to get the right answer? And is he willing to give it at that particular point? Because it is right on the edge of training camp, right? So, like, all that work has to be done, and they now are out of the preparation phase and into the execution phase. Like, as much as camp is a preparation for the season, the players need to show off what they've developed in the offseason and execute during practice to then be trusted to be on the field. So a lot of that has to come to a head very soon. And where does he think the program is? I think that's the biggest thing of that update at the end of the summer before spring camp as far as like where he thinks his team has developed the most in the offseason. And that would be where my brain goes. What about you? You're going to actually be there. You're going to be the one who has the opportunity to ask the question. So what are you looking forward to asking him when you actually get there?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that he will be asked a lot about where this Penn State roster actually is. And to the point you just made, I do think that he can, so far we have learned, he can be a little tough, Matt Campbell, to get specifics out of. He is to your point, he is very good at inclusivity and making sure that he talks about the team as a whole and as a, singular unit, of course. So when you try and get into specific guys of this guy and that guy and so, like, you can sometimes get somewhere and sometimes you can't. So to me, the question just is, how did these guys go through summer balancing the need to get the injured guys as much time as they possibly can on the field with the fact that some of them are still recovering, some of them are fully recovered, and that blend of injured guys, recovering guys versus healthy guys has really taken over the conversation of spring, and then has taken over the conversation of summer, and it's going to take over the conversation again here in fall camp. You know, Sean Fitz put out a great injury update post over at BlueWailIllustrated.com on Tuesday, and, you know, you look down that list, and a lot of guys that we thought would be back are indeed going to be back, but
yeah,
you know, back in hit the boot, you know, hit boots on the ground and running full speed 100% at the start of camp, or some of them back, but, you know, maybe they've ramped them up 25%, 50%, 75%,
right,
and away you go. And so I would expect Matt Campbell to get a lot of questions on that. And to me, we'll see what he says. I'm sure everything will be as positive and, you know, optimistic as can be. And certainly we'll, you know, get a better feel for how things actually are during camp once it starts. But yeah, that's the big question to me, just how they went through the summer and how they will go through preseason camp, balancing those two realities of you had a lot of guys that missed spring ball that need to get reps together quickly. And one of those guys is on the list of the title of today's show for Penn State players with the most to gain on my list in fall camp. And, you know, I just think that is going to make it won't make or break how this team does, considering they have time during the non-conference schedule to figure things out. But it was just a lot of guys who have been off the field in some way, shape, or form. And that conversation, I think, is going to dominate things out in Chicago.
Yeah, and so it is part of this conversation about those injured players and reincorporating them is, like you just said, where are they in their progress back? Because we know they've talked a lot about Alex Tash and how they expect him to be a part of this conversation. And yesterday, Nate talked about Gabe Burkle. And we actually had a conversation after the show where we were talking about, like, he's saying not enough people are talking about Gabe Burkle. And I said, yes, but where is he in the development process? I know he's talented. I also know he got injured in week 11 last year. So is he part of the conversation early on? And how does that change how Andrew Rappleyea fits into the picture early on? And then as Burkle gets, you know, back into the conversation, like, how some of these players are not going to be 100%. Like, I'm sorry, I don't believe, even if I'm told that they're going to be available in camp, I don't believe that they're going to be like 100% ready to go. And so I know I'm kind of restating what you just said, but there is that aspect of this when it comes to certain players of, we can talk about them, but I just don't think that they're going to be a significant part of the picture until we get closer to the date of the injury, right? And so there's a couple guys we're going to talk about later in the show in that area.
Yeah, that is a concern for me too, because you look at where some, you know, I know that Matt Campbell's line back during spring was, you know, for the most part, the guys who were unavailable, they expected to be back for camp. But to your point, I think that the injury timeline for some of these guys, you talk about Tash getting hurt late in the year. You talk about, you know, two guys that are interesting to me is Tony Rojas, who will be at Big Ten Media Days, and Jeremiah Cooper. Both of those, they suffered the same injury, knee injuries, roughly the same day. I mean, if you look at the timeline of when the news came out about both those guys, it was within a couple days of each other. So those two fascinate me, and that's one question for Matt Campbell as well, is how similar or dissimilar have their recoveries been? Cooper's a guy that looks possibly could start at safety, opposite Marcus Neal, should his recovery timeline and then work back into the rotation merit it. And then obviously Tony Rojas is expected to be a star of this defense, but you can't change the calendar. And so I think that really is, you know, all signs point to both of those guys being ready to rock and roll, but how soon are they ready to rock and roll? I guess what I'm getting at here is, and we're maybe getting a little bit of far, you know, out of the way here, but into the weeds. But I guess what I'm getting at here is the Penn State defense could look very different in weeks 1, 2, and 3 compared to 4.
Yeah, and that's, I think, also part of, I've seen Denton Lynn do that before too, where he's gone through certain parts of the schedule and there's just certain aspects of the defense he hasn't needed until a certain point, so they haven't used it. And some of those are going to be determined by the opponent, but with their opponent to begin the year, like, they could be in base defense and it won't matter. So there's a lot of layers to that when it comes to the Penn State defense and its makeup and personality for the fall. But you got to have those guys out there to actually practice the things that you're expecting with them. And with Rojas and, you know, with Cooper, they're going to be a huge part of that. And figuring that out in camp is absolutely is part of the determining what you're going to do and not do during the season.
There's no doubt about it. One thing, just from a big picture perspective, Bill in the chat said, with the talk of the SEC breaking away from the NCAA, does that force the Big Ten to follow? What if no other leagues follow them? It will be interesting to see. So that is going to come up at Big Ten Media Days next week, obviously. No question about that. That will be a top talking point, the current congressional talks about the Protect College Sports Act and how all these different things tie together as it relates to the future of college football. I think that the SEC is just posturing. I don't think it's breaking away. And if it did break away, I think it would break away with the Big Ten as opposed to doing it by itself. So
how does that even work if you have a one-team conference championship? And so would their playoff be the conference championship game to end, and then their season would just end in November? Would they not do any bowl games whatsoever? Breaking away from the NCAA, they would. That just doesn't seem like from a contractually how they even do that, because they're part of the college football playoff contract, I'm assuming. So all of those things don't make a lot of sense.
Right. No, it doesn't. I think it's just posturing, but that'll come up. That'll be one of the high level topics that come up in Chicago next week. Excuse me. Of course, the other one will be NIL. I'm curious to hear what these guys say about the new Adidas stuff, too. I know it seems like it's out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. No one really cares that 21 days ago, Penn State switched from Nike to Adidas anymore. But it is a new football. It is new equipment, new pads, new this, that, maybe not pads, but new uniforms, new sneakers, new cleats, all that stuff. Just curious to hear more about that.
Gear.
Josh Hype.
Yeah.
What's that?
Performance gear. I was just agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just interested to see that. And again, no one's going to trash Adidas, I wouldn't think, in the beginning stages of a 10-year, $300 and some million contract. Yeah. But just I'm curious to get some feedback on that. And then, like I said, Becht, Tony Rojas, Anthony Danko will all be there as well. To me, the big takeaway from those guys is just continue to get information about where they're at in their progress back to the field, back to being fully 100%. It sounds like, at the very least, Becht will be, and I would think Rojas and Danko will be very close, if not. But we're going to find out for sure. I wrote yesterday, though, I think this is the first time in Penn State football history that not a single Big Ten Media Day contingent on the player, not a single player from the Big Ten Media Day contingent side of things was full go in spring practice. I can't remember that ever being the case. So
yeah, it's
not a huge side note, but an interesting side note. Yeah,
interesting offseason where your most important players are all injured, or at least had some sort of off-season procedure. It's hard to say Anthony Danko was injured when I don't want to say it was voluntary, but it was, he clearly went through part of the winter and then decided to get something addressed. So it's not the same as his season was ended with injury, if that makes sense. There wasn't that event as opposed to, hey, he's now out for the spring because of X.
Yes, it's 100% the case. All right, well, that'll wrap up our Big Ten Media Days conversation, but stay tuned for more coverage from that. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Why? Because when you subscribe to the channel and you hit that bell button, you know when we're live. And in situations like next week where we have a show on Wednesday typically, but I'll be traveling Wednesday, we're still trying to figure out what the game plan is going to be for that. But guess what? If you're subscribed to the channel and you have that bell notification on, you won't have to worry about it. You'll know when we're live and or when there's new Matt Campbell footage from out in Chicago. Same with the players. So sign up today here on the Blue White Illustrated, or subscribe today rather, on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. And obviously you can check us out too over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. All right, let's get into the title topic of today's show, which is, again, the 4 Penn State players, and we're going to pick a total of 8 because T. Frank and I, for once, do not have a duplicate player on our list. The players that have the most to gain during fall camp. So Penn State will kick off camp about 2 weeks from today. Then the Lions will, of course, practice through to September 5th when they take on Marshall to open the season at Beaver Stadium. T. Frank, I'm curious, before we dive into this, you wrote about this over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. That was the impetus for having this conversation on the show today. You broke down your list of 4. We have come up together with a collective 8. How many could you have done? If you wanted to do as many as you felt legitimately had a case, how many do you think you could have got to before you said, all right, enough's enough of that?
Yeah, I think I could have done maybe 2 more, and then it was just am I getting into position battle camp battle things. And that's what I was trying to avoid. I was trying to avoid just doing a different iteration of camp battle preview because I want to do those later and I want to do this collaboratively here on the show. So it was trying to ride that line of, it's not just they have the most to gain because they are going to win or lose a position battle. It's that if they win or lose, how much can they win or lose, and will it change our expectations of the rotation? So, can a guy go from not a starter to a starter, or can a guy go from, this, we expect 2 or 3 players at this position to now the rep share has changed. And so there's a couple more players I could have put on the list, and actually I pulled one off and put on a different player for the show today, so it's even a little bit different than that list. So I guess 3 was the answer. I could have gone maybe with 3 more to this camp battle outlook that isn't a camp battle preview.
Yes, right. Because we have a few
more
days. We have a few more shows to fill, buddy. So yes, it is not a camp battle preview.
2, a week and a half more, and if I start writing camp battle previews right now when everybody's on vacation instead of the week of or the week before, I am wasting content, and I don't want to do that.
No, I don't either. All right, let's get to number 4.
Number 4.
Really interesting name to kick off this list, T. Frank. I was not necessarily expecting to see it, but then the more I thought about it this morning while we were getting ready for the show, the more I think it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah, Vaea Ikakoula, who was not on my original list.
Did you see how I set you up there so you could pronounce it? Yeah, I was not trying that. It's too early on this fine Wednesday morning.
Well, if you missed it, I did an off-season video where I just got embarrassed about not knowing how to say any of the new names on the roster. So I've gone through, it's baptism by fire. So here's the thing with Vaea Ikakoula. I didn't think he was a fit for Penn State. I didn't think he was a guy that should come to Penn State based on his film from last year. And then after talking to some people and some sources, and basically they all said, yeah, he's got to lose a ton of weight before he can play here. And he's lost a ton of weight. Looking at him in the spring, different football player. Looking at him in recent photos online over the summer, he's lost even more weight. I think he's down to 326 pounds. And I say down to 326 pounds because he was upwards of 360 last year. He couldn't get into his stance. He could not put his hand on the ground in a three-point stance because he was too big. And so they've worked on that with him. He is, I believe, a redshirt freshman. And now he's the Polynesian body type of how the hell is he so quick for that size? And so behind Trevor Burr and Cooper Cousins, especially at guard, and the interior 3 positions are kind of fluid where you're going to see different guys working at center as the backup to the backup there. Especially with Dom Ruley out, we saw all of these guys taking reps at center during the spring. Basically who those 2 guys are going to go, but they're always going to have an emergency center. So really we're talking about the guards. At that guard position, there is no clear-cut number 3 right now, in my opinion. And the guy that I think you could work his way into not just being the 3rd guy, but potentially, if he takes the right steps, could be the 6th offensive lineman in certain situations is Ikakoula. Because they've used... I was actually watching some of the opponents for Penn State on film this week, and I was watching a couple Big 12 games because of some transfers. I think it was I was watching the Utah game, and I saw Taylor Mauser put an offensive lineman in motion just like Andy Iwane was. Just like Andy Kotelnicki. I've seen him, the guard split block. I've seen it. And so there's an opportunity for a 6 offensive lineman in this offense if they want to do that. And I think he's on the list. He's on the list with a tackle as far as guys who could be that 6th player and could change the offensive line conversation going forward of, we know roughly the starting 5, we know maybe the 6th, the 7th. What does that actually look like? And he could put his name into that conversation with a strong spring.
Yeah, I like. Excuse me. I like that a lot, and I think that this offensive line conversation is going to be really interesting. You wrote about it after speaking with Taylor Mauser at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, but the starting 5 obviously pretty well set. You'll have Brock Riker still battle Dom Ruley for the center job, but I think Riker at this point to me is the starting center until proven otherwise. So yeah. So you have your starting 5 set, but I think those battles for the second, who's your first tackle in? If somebody needs to come out, either Anthony Danko or Malachi Goodman, easy for me to say, who's the first guy in? And I think that there's some conversations about that. And it's the same thing with guard. Who's the first guy in if Cooper Cousins or Trevor Burr need to come out? So interesting pick there. I think it's a good one, and because that battle is going to be interesting. My number 4 pick is Rocco Becht. And that may not be in the spirit of this conversation, but bear with me, and we'll see. You can let me know in the chat, or if you're listening on the replay on the podcast side of things, in the comments whether you agree. But Rocco Becht did not have a full spring, number one. He was able to do 7-on-7 work, which is great, but he did not do any contact work. He also was surrounded by a bunch of players he is going to need to throw the ball to who were limited. And he's also going to be protected by a guy in Anthony Danko who was limited. So there's just those non-contact reps are the biggest thing to me that he didn't get. But beyond that, and then you had Chase Soule and Brett Skelton, who were limited this year at the receiver spot. Andrew Rapplier did not participate in spring ball. I mean, you have a lot of guys on this offense who were in some way, shape, or form. If they weren't a running back, the position group was affected in some way, shape, or form by being limited. And so to me, Rocco Becht in this offense has a ton to gain because they just can't replicate in the summer what you can get with the pads on when you're actually making contact with the opponent. Now, no one will touch him, obviously, but everyone else and run the offense in that way. You can't replicate that in the summer, and then you get to do it in the spring. So I think Rocco Becht, but this is more not just about him, but the offense as a whole, has a lot to gain during this preseason camp that kicks off in a couple weeks, simply because of the fact that they missed out on a lot of they got valuable reps, some more than others, but they also missed out on them during spring ball.
Yeah, I would say the saving grace here is that he was able to get in for the final 8 practices, and then summer, from a 7-on-7 perspective, is good for the quarterback and the rhythm and the timing. And some of these guys like Rapplier are out there. But you're right. In terms of a full offense, they haven't been able to put it all together. So that's absolutely part of what they need to do during fall camp.
All right, let's get to number 3.
Number 3.
So you go to the receiver room here, and for full disclosure, I did too, but I didn't want to duplicate our list, so I will respond to your feelings here, and then we'll get to my guy.
Yeah, Karan Brookins, I think, is the receiver. So Zay Robinson and Karan Brookins were on the original list.
Yeah.
And the more I think about it, and the more like one of those guys, I think there's room for one of those guys to truly be in the rotation. And at this point, both of them are options. However, like if we're saying Kobe Howard is the number 3 receiver, and that's where I have it as the starting point, as he's the slot receiver and he's going to spend some time at X and Z. Like, he can play outside, he can play inside. He's got the versatility to do both. But Karan Brookins is the prototype of the X. Like, so in the receiver positions, there's the X receiver, which is the number 1 receiver in the offense. That's Chase Soule. And then you've got your Z receiver, who is the blocker and the guy that runs routes and does a couple of other things in the offense, right? That is Brett Eskildsen. And so you've got a Kobe Howard that can do that Z job behind Eskildsen. He can play in the slot, play to that side of the field. Karan Brookins is 6'5", 205 pounds, and runs really, really well. So if you're looking for a like-for-like replacement where there are reps of you need a specific type of body type and skill, Brookins is the closest thing to Soule. So if he needs a breather, you can bring in a guy like Brookins. If the light comes on for him, he's incredibly talented. Yeah. It may not be this year. I'm not projecting that, but if it does, he's a guy that can, independent of Kobe Howard, put himself into the rotation in that role and see the field. And if he does, there's an opportunity for him to make big plays, because that's kind of the nature of that position. Is you're going to block, and then you're going to go downfield, and you're going to get some deep shots. And I think he could do both of those things. So that's his positional opportunity within the receiver room that is both open and crowded at the same time. So like finding the right lane in that conversation, and that's why I went with Brookins over Robinson.
You're right. So I think 2 things. Number one of those guys, to your point, I think there is probably only room for one to be in the rotation, but I think one of them has to be good enough to do it. The Penn State cannot, I think, survive in functional offense the way it wants to without that being the case. But there's a lot of buzz for these guys. You know, Amari and Jackson's another guy we could probably throw into this mix, just that receivers battle in terms of guys who are going to try and make the jump into the rotation this fall. But I think you make the right pick here with Brookins. Like I said, he was on my list as well. But in the name of not making duplications, I switched my pick to Andrew Rapplier. So this tight end room, we were talking a little bit about it off air, and I think you and Nate might have got into it a bit yesterday. But this tight end room is fascinating because you have Ben Brahmer, returning all Big 12 tight end, who is among, I would assume, I haven't taken too deep of a dive, but probably the top draft candidates at the tight end position for the 2027 NFL draft. He's going to be the guy at tight end. Who's the second guy? You look at this list. Andrew Rappleyea is coming back from an injury that caused him to miss spring ball. Gabe Burkel's coming off an injury that he suffered late in the season that is going to, at some point, way, shape, or form, probably limit his start to training camp at the very least.
Yeah.
Then you have Cooper Alexander as well. So it's an interesting room. There was only 3 guys available, if I remember correctly, 3 tight ends available for spring practice that we saw out there.
Yeah, and Finn Fermanagh also made a big move during the spring because he played so well. And there's a role for him as a blocking tight end in the offense as well. So I'm not saying that he's going to be a regular starter, but he definitely earned a scholarship, let alone maybe a role on special teams. And so there's some positive movement there. If you believe they actually got deeper in that stuff, but they found Finn Fermanagh at the position.
Yeah, hey, you take the bodies you take the reps you can get with the bodies you have, and if someone takes a big step forward, good for them. And it sounds like he did, and now Rappleyea is going to try and do that, of course, here in the preseason camp. His latest one at Penn State, it was someone asking in the chat, he had some kind of foot injury that caused him to miss spring ball. So we'll see. But I look at him and the way he finished the 2025 season, and I just think that there's room to grow, obviously, for him, but there's also room to be more consistent. And so when you look at guys with the most to gain, like to me, it's not about the sheer talent doesn't seem to be the issue. It's more about being consistent with the reps that he has. And that comes from that. It relates to both making mistakes and also obviously performing, at a high level when it comes to catching the ball and things like that.
So I want to clarify something, too. This is what I was trying to say earlier about Anthony Danko. Sunwin says right foot injury, and that's not technically like how I would describe it. It was a cleanup procedure, right? So it's something that you choose to get done at a certain time, but like he was playing through it, he was living with it, and decided like this was the opportunity for me to get that done. It's still surgery. Like, let me tell you, like you get surgery and like you don't know 100% what's going to happen on the other side. Like it is... They get the best care in the world, and still, it's just one of those things when you decide to when these things happen. So, it's a better starting point in my opinion, from like the way you perceive things of like nothing from my understanding, nothing broke, right? So when you say injury, there was an event, a thing happened, a bone snapped, a tendon broke, whatever. I don't think it was that. And so, like, then you get into the area of, like, the quick turnaround and how he could be good to go for the summer and how he could be good to go for camp and those things. That is a different conversation. So, like, from Andrew Rappleyea's perspective, like, I do expect him to be good to go as opposed to, we talked about Gabe Burkel. Here's the thing. You mentioned Ben Bramer. And Ben Bramer, I think we talk about usage in the offense, right? So it's about the role you're given and the opportunity in our modern society to create highlights and stats. He has the best opportunity to catch big passes down the field, be the deep play threat. But when you look at their actual physical talents and their game, Andrew Rappelye is a better blocker, and he's an all-around player, catch-and-run kind of guy. Gabe Burkel is the same size and has probably more athletic talent overall. So he's a guy that you could say, like in the offense last year, he was running more routes. He was running those routes better, and he was the primary run blocker between the two. And I think Burkel could get better in that area. Again, talking about Burkel, like the talent is obvious when you watch him on film. When are we going to see it? You know, when you get injured so late in the year, we had this conversation about Anthony Danko last year, and I said I'm not expecting him to be 100% anytime in the first month of the year. Because when you get injured late in the year, like technically you're cleared to go back to activities after X date. But when are you actually full go? When do you trust whatever the injury was? When do you get back your sea legs? When do you actually have the opportunity to lift, get stronger, and regain your athleticism? Those are all an entirely different conversation from the rehabilitation schedule, which clears you to do full activities. And then the full activities result in you becoming an athlete again. Now these guys have they're rubber bands. They snap back quickly, but there is a snapback period. And with some of these guys, like I don't know when Gabe Burkel is going to be available. So I'm not entirely sure how the tight end distribution is going to go. And I do think you're right to put Rappelye on here because he's the obvious guy who's going to be in that role. And if you have two to start the year, even if it is in the non-conference, you have opportunities to make plays. And so I think that is a fair one for Andrew Rappelye to gain a lot of experience and a lot of reps and maybe be a bigger part of that share of the tight end position as opposed to the H-back position with Burkel assuming he's working back slowly.
All right, let's get to number 2.
Number 2.
Number 2 on T. Frank and I's list of Penn State players with the most to gain in fall camp. T. Frank and I have a pretty good feel for where each other are going to go during these shows at this point of our careers. So there was a comment back in the beginning of the show, and he texted me and said, do not talk about that right now. Because I was going to talk about it right now as we were in the middle of a Big Ten Media Day discussion. So let's get to the guy that came up in the comments earlier, Armstrong Nnodim.
Yeah, Newhart want to know a lot of talk this offseason about Armstrong Nnodim. Could he potentially be a starter or a guy the UCLA players have first dibs? And yes, so this is the point about Armstrong Nnodim, and like the feedback about him and the analysis of him during spring was, oh wow, he is so strong. He is so athletic and strong. The power and everything, despite not having great technique at the moment, and I mean technique in terms of what they want him to do, how they want him to play, not necessarily any technique whatsoever, like coming into a new system, having a new defensive line coach there, new expectations. So still learning that stuff, but he was winning and excelling despite not having those things. So if this summer and during fall camp he gets better at that and that technique starts to lock into place more consistently, he stays square to the line of scrimmage, he defeats double teams better, instead of with just raw power, he's able to do it with raw power and technique. I don't know that he's going to be a starter. I think they'll give those guys in their final years that deference because they're still good, competent football players. But now we're talking about what's the rep share. Is he a co-starter? They're going to have 3 defensive tackle 5-man fronts anyway. So he's going to be a starter in that sub package when they want to go heavy. But is it a 2-to-1? Is it a 1-to-1? Like even if he's not the named starter, does he take as many reps as those other guys? And to me, this is the ideal outlook because you don't want to have a top 2 that are getting 50 snaps a game at defensive tackle. Big dudes, you want to get them as much rest as possible and be as deep as possible at that position. So if Nnodim, who separated himself into that top tier, then becomes a co-starter, I think this is a strength of the team. And that is what he has the opportunity to do during fall camp with that improvement.
So interesting. One thing I was going to cut you off and say, but I'm not going to. I was not going to. But the whole starter thing has become so bastardized in college sports. So CBS Sports put out an article that you and I were talking about a couple weeks ago about returning starters, returning production. So that is one list of returning starters across college football. Phil Steele's magazine obviously includes that information for every team in his magazine. I believe the Pick Six Previews does as well from Brett Cianci. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I am going to check. I would have to think it does. But anyway, point being, they're all different. They're not far off, but one will be 4 returning starters on defense. The other one will say 5. Then the other one will say 3.
Yep.
Why is that? I mean, in part because of what Penn State was doing last year and introducing like 32 guys as a part of the starting 22. But to your point, and part of that's NIL related, obviously, and part of that is just these guys are considered starters based on whatever package, whatever formation that you're going to start the game with. Now, do I like it? No. Introduce your 22 starters and move along with your day, but it's here nor there. It's not going to apparently happen anymore in college football, which makes tracking who is actually a returning starter hard. But to your point, the rep count does often show guys are at that level, despite what the quote-unquote depth chart might say.
I will allow for 24. So 1 alternate on each offense and defense. So like if you got 2 running backs that are starters, that's fine. But you can't do 2 running backs, 2 tight ends, 3 receivers. Like I understand you have to have what's your base offense? Even if it's what's your base offense that week, which obviously would give away like what you're running that week. And then, you know, on defense, you have to have a nickel and you have to have a base. And so if you want to have a linebacker and a corner or a 3rd or a 5th defensive lineman and a corner, like, okay, I'll allow for that. But when you do 6, like 3 alternates on each side, Liam Clifford's not a starter for Penn State last year. And so like, I agree with you that it gets a little ridiculous at a certain point.
Yeah, it certainly does. But I do think Armstrong is a good candidate for this list because he is a guy who just seems to continue to draw praise no matter who you talk to. And that's been really the case since he got on campus. And the guy is impressive to talk to when we've had the chance to do so as well. So I actually need to go back to that Lift for Life interview with him and produce something off of that. But really good interview and really good player who I think has a chance to really develop into something pretty darn good here at Penn State.
I have a hard time because one of the parts of talking season is it creates hype, right? And so you talk about something enough, it becomes a thing, and then that thing has to be backed by something in reality, right? And so the gap between the expectation based on the talk and then the production based on what's actually there is always the hype gap, right? And certain players don't live up to that.
Right.
I think Nnodim, first off, he's a defensive tackle, so as much as we are talking about him, he's never going to get the hype of a Saquon Barkley, right?
Sure.
But I think he can match it. I think there's less smoke and more fire here than in some situations.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to go over to the receivers room, over to the offense and to the receivers room. My number 2 pick is Keith Jones Jr., the Grambling State transfer. And why does he have something to gain? Because we didn't see him at all during the spring. And when we talked to him back in February, this is a guy who is obviously making a huge levels jump and was going to have to make a huge weight jump as well. But his speed was important, and it was part of, why he was able to move from Grambling State to the FBS level and Penn State, and what can he do, if anything, to try and find a spot, whether it's in the special teams world or whether it's on the offense. So he was just a guy that, again, I mentioned earlier that injury report story from Sean Fitz, and you can go check that out over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, join for just $1. But Keith Jones Jr. is one of the guys that's mentioned, and if he is good to go, which it's, that looks like he will be, I'm just interested to see, T. Frank, what his combination of size and speed could possibly do in this offense. And once he gets a chance to show it, can he capitalize enough to, can he capitalize on it enough to make an impact this fall?
Yeah, it's the same conversation with Karan Brookins. So there's an opening in terms of who can be the backup to Chase Soul, and those are the two guys that have the ability on the roster. There's a couple other guys that could do it, but those are the two top guys we're going to be talking about.
All right, let's get to number 1 on the list of players who have the most to gain in fall camp.
Number 1.
We are both going to the defensive line room, T. Frank. You are going to go outside. I am going to go inside. And to be fair, if we were duplicating picks, this would have been my number 1 as well.
Yeah, Max Granville. He's in the graphic. Yeah. He's in the title to the show because, I'm just going to play this again. The dude at 252 pounds is absolutely jacked. And I think there has been an effort for him to become resilient and bulletproof after a couple of the injuries. When I hear he had a back injury during, I think he mentioned it was a back injury during winter lifting or somewhere in there. Yeah. That's an effort injury. Like, that's a dude who's just grinding in the weight room and probably pushed it a little too hard. So, like, I talked about him yesterday, so I don't want to go too far into this again. But basically, like, he is a complete defensive end in theory. Played the run really well in high school. I think he pays attention to that. He's gotten bigger and stronger. He's filled out his frame, and at 250 plus pounds, can be a guy that drops into coverage. He can be a versatile player. We've talked a lot about these guys that can play on the inside, that have the size to bump down and play head up on the tackle. He can be a guy that can rush the passer off the edge, set the run, and drop into coverage. He's got that athletic profile to be a hybrid style defensive end. In a zone blitzing system, he's going to do that no matter what, but can he excel at those things? I think he can. I think he can be an asset, limited asset in coverage. I don't think he's going to be dropping I don't even know the defensive end that does that great anymore. Like, most of them are true edge rushers, and then they're okay in coverage. I don't think he's going to be elite in coverage, but he will be a good player with the athleticism to not be a liability that you target in those situations. And that's the upper side of his potential. He can become a starter in this situation. I don't know that he will, but it's kind of the same thing with Armstrong Nnodim. Can he become a co-starter so you have 3 starters at defensive end? And we're in that conversation where you now, before the game, you're listing his name along with Ivan Kamaju and Ike Eziogu.
Yes, correct. I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Somebody was asking about a depth chart, and so I just Googled it real quick. And so to T. Frank's point here, no matter whether Penn State puts one or not, we'll have one for you, I'm sure, multiple times throughout.
Yeah.
So they did it at Iowa State.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, yes, they did it at Iowa State. But
Yeah.
let me read you a line from the Des Moines Register. It says, historically, the Cyclones' depth charts have not always reflected reality. In the past, there have been injured players listed as possible starters. In other instances, the Cyclones have trotted out a different configuration at certain positions come game day other than the one posted on the depth chart. So, point being, I'm just going to toot our own horn. Check the BWIillustrated.com depth chart. I think that whether or not Penn State does one or not, it'll be there, and it'll be as accurate as can be. And we will put at least an or beside injured guys who might be on the official, unofficial depth chart or otherwise. Yeah. Speaking of ors, that's a good segue to my number one on this list. I'm going to the fourth defensive tackle battle. It looks like the top three are pretty well solidified. So Elijah Carnell, a Iowa State transfer, and Ty Blanding, a returning Penn State player, to my eyes, look to be the ones who are in that fourth defensive tackle battle. And one of those guys is going to get, just by sheer sake of numbers, unless they're going to play the defensive tackles 100% of the snaps, one of those guys is going to get it, I think at minimum, probably 10 to 20% of the snap count sheet, if not more. So who is it? Or do they split it evenly because one does not overtake the other? I'm fascinated to see how those two battle it out in camp.
Yeah, and they're different body types, so they can fill different roles, but you do need to essentially have like a two deep. You need to have guys that are going to play they're not going to play nose and three, but they need to have guys that can do both, and they need to have guys that have certain skills and assets. To me, the guy that has Ty Blanding is athletic and his freakishly strong, and yet he has struggled at times, I think, with the technique. Carnell, 6'5", 300 pounds, I think naturally has the flexibility. He's the guy I have as the fourth defensive tackle, and then Blanding can be kind of a 5 technique or a hybrid specialist to come in certain packages. That's a huge development, as you mentioned, not just for now, but for the future. I wrote this, Greg, and I'm going to pivot to a quick conversation about this.
Yep.
Everyone tells me, because Siale Tapaki and Keanu Williams are both going to graduate after this year, that Penn State absolutely needs to go into the transfer portal and get a starter at defensive tackle. But you talk about Nnodim. Right. And then you talk about Carnell, who is a redshirt sophomore, who has the size of a Keanu Williams. He needs to grow into that frame. Then you're starting with a Blanding. Those guys have to develop. But if you're talking about projecting to the future, Nnodim is a huge find and win for them in the portal. Carnell is a guy that they have assessed and recruited and brought with them from Iowa State, and I think can play defensive tackle. Now that I've seen him in person, I definitely see why they wanted to bump inside and play defensive tackle. And then you need one of a couple of guys to fill out and be part of the the two deep next year. I think they could go out and get a defensive tackle in the portal. Yes, but do they need a starter? I don't think they necessarily need a starter. I think they can go and get a piece that needs to be a part of the rotation. And we haven't even talked about the Utah defensive tackle, the Utah nose tackle that came over, who was also out in the spring. I think that they brought him over for a reason. And so is he going to be part of the conversation this year or moving forward? I think moving forward at this point in the year for him makes more sense. So now the number of players they have for next year that reasonably project into the starting two deep with development and talent, I think that it's not a high priority in the portal window. Like certain roster positions, you can project they need to go get a body.
Right.
Tackle, sure. Like maybe they need one, but I also don't think they need a starter or they're crying for somebody at that position. You can agree or disagree. What do you think?
No, right there, I'm with you at the moment. I think so much of, so look, I think how Alex Mansky develops, you have to go get a portal quarterback, I think probably no matter what, but the level of quarterback you go get in the portal will depend on how Alex Mansky develops during the 2026 season. And I think that's a case across the roster. There's a lot of guys who, based on how they either do or do not, and this is the case every year, but I feel like it's more the case this year with a roster that at some spots is very old and at some other spots is just very young. And so I'm with you on that. If these guys develop, it won't be as big of a need.
Yeah.
Obviously, the concern is going to be if you have to go defensive line shopping and quarterback shopping, and we're talking starting Big Ten level caliber quarterback shopping potentially and Big Ten level defensive tackle shopping because you don't feel great about where you stand with some of these young guys. Good luck. Somebody better find Penn State a money hose and connect it to a money tree because those are expensive positions to shop for.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
All right, folks, let's get to Best Bets. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel, BWIillustrated.com. We are continuing this Wednesday, July 22nd edition of BWI Live with Best Bets. It is time for best bets from BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3, capital O, capital N, and the number 3, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code ON3. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code ON3, O-N, both capitalized, number 3, when you sign up. Once you're signed up, or if you're already signed up, turn your baseball predictions into bigger potential payouts with an MLB Parlay Boost token. You can build your favorite MLB parlay featuring the teams and players you believe will come through. Then apply your Parlay Boost token to increase the odds and elevate your potential winnings. Whether you're backing multiple game winners, stacking player props, or building a same game parlay, your MLB Parlay Boost token helps you get even more out of every winning ticket. Best bet, we only have one of them today. It is the dog days of summer. It is also the dog days of betting. There is just, now that the World Cup is over and football is not quite here yet, it is not quite baseball or bust. We have some golf, obviously coming off of the British Open, or the Open, I guess is what they call it now, but it's a lot of baseball at this point. Dodgers are minus 120 to beat the Phillies tonight with Aaron Nola on the mound. I know it's Eric Lauer for the Dodgers. I don't know. You're very rarely are you going to get that short of a price on a team like the Dodgers against the human home run machine that is Aaron Nola. And I know he pitched very well last week, but I am going with the Dodgers minus 120 as today's best bets. T. Frank is not an Aaron Nola fan either, so I'm going to put put those words in his mouth right now.
Greg, the last time I checked in baseball, when I was the producer of the Sports Talk with Steve Jones show on ESPN Radio in State College, and that was 6.5 years ago. He's still playing, and he's still with the Phillies?
He sure is, and he's going to be there a heck of a lot longer. He has a nice, big, long contract that's going to eventually pay him a lot, and barring incredible amounts of improvement and consistency. Once that improvement happens, it's going to be a long, expensive contract for the Phillies. So he did pitch. I must give him credit. Did pitch pretty well last Thursday. They went an inning too long with him, and he gave up 4 runs, but he also only got 3 hits of support. So it is what it is. But minus 120 on the Dodgers against Aaron Nola, especially after the clown show the Phillies put on the bases last night. Take the Dodgers tonight. BetMGM. That was best bets.
See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer now for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are not withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossings Casino and Hotel.
All right, T. Frank, we have about 10 minutes left in today's BWI Live, and we are going to take you all on a ride with us into the BWI Mailbag. All right. I'm not sure what exactly was going on there. Were you hearing anything?
It was working.
It was not on my end. All I saw was a blank screen, so that's my fault. Okay. Well, technical difficulties are always fun. All right.
It happened yesterday with the mailbag too. Like, I don't know what happened to the internet at the very end. I don't know. That's annoying. We're going to have to figure that out.
That's okay. We will figure it out indeed. I meant to text you this earlier. I was having computer issues this morning. Everything's just loading slow. So hopefully it's not been a lag issue on the listener's end. But if there is, let us know in the comments. We'll see what we can fix. All right. You ready to get to this, buddy? What question you want to start with?
Yeah, actually, let's start in the chat because everyone wants to know, what's LeVar Arrington II's progress and projection?
There are 3 things you can do in Penn State football content creation, and that is write about LeVar Arrington, Max Granville, or Kobe Howard, and you are going to hit someone who wanted to know. That's for sure.
Yeah, here's the thing. LeVar can find a role as a specialist in the offense. And like, here's what I need to find this out. Like, where is he physically developing? Because if he is 222 pounds or whatever he is right now on the roster, 6'3", he's not big enough to play full-time defensive end. And he can only play in certain situations at that size for a defense that wants to be able to kick guys inside. I saw him play head up on the tackle and head up on the tight end like 2 plays during the blue-white scrimmage, and it did not go well for him. Right. So he needs to either find a role. Basically, here's the other aspect. You're not making a package just for him. He's not at that part of his development where you're like, okay, we need to get him on the field. So is he going to be the backup in spirit to Caleb Bacon? That's, to me, I would see that as that's his closest body type, is actually linebacker Caleb Bacon in terms of a guy who can rush off the edge. And obviously LeVar is better at that than he is playing in coverage. And it's kind of the opposite with Caleb Bacon as a guy who is a linebacker and can line up on the edge. So that versatility is what he is going to bring to the table as a former box linebacker. And does he earn that role where he can take some of those snaps as a hybrid player? That's his path to the field. And so he's not going to be, to me, part of the 2 deep unless secretly he's 250 pounds. Like in the last month and a half, 2 months, he packed on a ton of weight and we haven't been told, like the roster hasn't updated. But even if he gets to 2, Greg, what do you think the cutoff is for him to like play full-time defensive end snaps and earn a role? What's the size minimum for him with his body type?
Man, you are our X's and O's expert and formations expert. I mean, to me, I would say, at minimum, got to be in the 230s at minimum, and that's probably not good enough. But I would say maybe you can make it work at that weight. So Penn State has one on the roster right now, and they have not updated this roster since it's probably about a month-ish. I would say they have him on the roster right now at 220. LeVar Arrington II at 220. Yeah, man,
I mean, he's smaller than all of their linebackers. He's the same weight as
correct.
Cam Smith.
Right.
And so that is my problem. And I know like size is not everything, but it is not nothing, especially for a defense that wants size at defensive end. So I don't have a positive projection to him to the 2 deep this year, but he can obviously play on special teams and find some sort of role on the team.
Yeah, I mean, Deshaun Burnett is currently listed at 226. He is the lightest defensive end, not named LeVar Arrington II. So I think at minimum, it applies to both of those guys. If they want to make an impact this year, they have to get into the 230s. But we'll see. Maybe D'Anton Lynn has some ideas about how to use those guys in ways that put their skill sets to their best of their abilities and uses their speed and size and things like that. So we'll see. But yeah, that's where I'm at this point as well.
Yeah. Let's go to this question. Just because it plays off that really well. J Mill wants to know what under-the-radar players need to have a strong fall camp in order to for you to buy into this team's chances of being truly competitive in the Big Ten. Who do you have as an under-the-radar player? Because there's over-the-radar players. There's guys that are on the radar. Like, I don't want to have that conversation. The obvious names are obvious. I like the fact that he has this under-the-radar. Who do you have?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in part you could go back to the conversation we had earlier in the show about the guys that need to have the most to gain. Some of them I think are probably under the radar. Some of them are not. But I mean, when you look at how this team is going to be constructed, I am half tempted to take one of the punters, like whoever the starting punter is, because it sounds ridiculous, but you don't realize how much a punter gains for you until you don't have a punter gain it for you. And that comes from field position. That comes from helping your offense and your defense. So I'm tempted to take one of the punters, but that's not really the spirit of this question. I don't think Sean Fitz would argue that, but I don't really think that the Lions' competitive chances ride and die on the punter being the make or break guy. But how about this? I'm going to go with, and I don't know if it's fair to call him under the radar or not, but James Peoples, the Ohio State transfer at running back, is a guy that's obviously behind Carson Hansen and battling with Quentin Martin. I think if he is a guy who can be a home run hitter and can bring some of that former 4-star recruit flavor, abilities that he has showcased some at Ohio State, but maybe not as much as expected leading to the transfer, I think that would help Penn State considerably and make this offense a bit more dynamic. Him or Quentin Martin, either one of those guys. Maybe you have an opinion about Quentin Martin not being under the radar, but to me, right.
Yeah. That would be the one thing I'd say is both those guys are clearly on the radar because Penn State fans want one of them to be the starter. Right. But I would agree with you in terms of like depth chart wise or in that particular conversation. I'm going to go to, I'm going to pull an audible here. Jeremiah Cooper was my initial answer because I'll just give you two. Because Jeremiah Cooper to me is a huge part of this conversation of why we're talking so much about Zion Tracy. Dan Lynn has described putting Zion Tracy at free safety in some of their base defenses and talking about how much athleticism it gives them in the secondary, which the converse of that is they don't have a lot of athleticism in the secondary. So that is a concern. And Jeremiah Cooper can help that, but he's injured. Like, he's coming back from that injury. So if you have him and Zion Tracy, then you can choose to put Zion Tracy at safety. You don't have to put him at free safety. And then you have the flexibility to do a bunch of cool stuff in the secondary. So I think under the radar, he's one for Penn State's defense to work and to be as versatile as it wants to be. Cooper's there just because of his injury. I'm going to go to a different Cooper, though, as my number one answer, and that's Cooper Cousins.
Yeah.
We don't really talk about Cooper because he's kind of an omnipresent force of a fan favorite and a guy that's been here forever, and we were talking about him a long time, and everyone assumes and expects he's good. And, like, you know, he's a great guy. I'm rooting for him personally as a person. We don't know that yet. Like, we have one full game, and the first half of that game, he had kind of a shaky start to the Pinstripe Bowl. Played better at the second half. But is he as good as his talent would indicate? Right. And if he is, then they have a really strong right side of the offensive line with him and Anthony Danko. And you are answering a question, I think one of the biggest questions outside of Malachi Goodman, of a guy that has not started before. So Danko and Burr, like new to the offense or new to Penn State. Riker has started before, even if at Texas State. He has played football. He has been on the field. Right. Goodman and Cooper Cousins have not had been full-time starters, and I think that's the two players that I would go with. Do you have somebody? Sorry, you answered the question first.
But those two guys, 100%. And I think that I forget what the conversation point was. Oh, it was 50 days. I did 3 concerns for Penn State and 2 things you can feel good about. And one of the concerns was, what if the offensive line isn't as good as a lot of people think it can or will be? And you look at this group. I think on paper, and I think from a depth chart perspective, it is solid and it has a chance to be a stock up for Penn State compared to a year ago. I feel like that's become in some corners of the Penn State fan base a foregone conclusion. And to the point you just made, some guys are going to have to prove it, especially once it gets into the Big Ten portion of the schedule.
This is the thing I'll say is an optimism, a point to optimism is when I've watched Ryan Clanton's offensive lines, when I've watched Matt Campbell's offensive lines, they did not fail because they made a lot of mistakes or because I was like, oh, that's a mental error, or they just didn't, they didn't get to that block. It's that they physically couldn't do it. Like, they had a lot of issues where they were beaten athletically. Less problem with that with this particular group. So if the coaching, I don't want to say is better because, I think Phil Trautwein was a really good offensive line coach. But when it comes to just the style from Ryan Clanton and really the top-down clarity of the marriage between Ryan Clanton and Taylor Mauser as the offensive play caller and then Campbell, like all of this is Campbell's development process. Like, he's brought in and recruited these coaches. They're all young. They're all learning under him. I think that unity could produce a better result and a more clear expectations of what the offensive line should and shouldn't be doing in every situation, which gives them the opportunity to be confident and execute. And that could be a big step forward, even if they're younger, for this offensive line in general.
All right, T. Frank, let's get to one more. I'll let you call the final mailbag question of the show. I think we only have one left there. We got 2 left. No, there's a couple there. Let's get to one more.
Let's go to, Lands. Last season's defense of multiple players, Zane Durant, Dom DeLuca, Zakee Wheatley, being asked to do things that were not their strength. Do you foresee any projected starters being in questionable fits in this defense? That's, I think, the point of this defense, Greg, is that they don't do that. It is an adaptable enough defense where it is multiple, so they don't have to do certain things if they don't want to. So if they don't have enough guys to run the 5-man fronts, they can do it in different ways, right? They can find different ways to get to an answer they want. I would say just the biggest question I have is the secondary. So you do need to have a certain amount of versatility, and Marcus Neal's coverage ability is my biggest question about this starting unit. You can put him in the box. He can be a blitzer. He can be an eraser as kind of a robber, a guy in underneath coverage who is going to be attacking downhill. But if you want to have that true versatility and that unpredictability, you need your safeties to be able to do a little bit of everything. They've talked about him playing in coverage and playing in a deep half or a deep middle field. I need to see a little bit more of that to know he's a guy that can do it. He's 220 pounds, man. I mean, at 6'1", he's built like a linebacker. Again, he's bigger than LeVar Arrington. And so, at a certain point, physics take over in coverage unless you're Derwin James. And so I have a question about like that level of versatility. You can still hide him, but now if you're hiding him and maybe you need to kind of hide Cooper Ebel or Caleb Bacon in coverage, now you got 3 players that you're trying to like move the shell pieces around, to hide where the shell is.
Right.
And I don't know that that's a strength. So to me, like that's the question I have in terms of the interior and its coverage ability when you add in those 3 players, specifically with Marcus Neal.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you're right on. You're spot on there, and I do think that Lynn will. It was interesting, not to go back to the past, but I was reading Josh Heupel's transcript from SEC Media Days. Guess what? The Tennessee folks are on to the Jim Knowles takes more than a year to implement his system storyline that Penn State fans are well aware of. So I'll be interested to follow that from afar. But yeah, there was not always answers for Penn State in that defense last year, despite Jim Knowles claiming there would be. I think Lynn probably will have more of them this time around.
Also, I want to have a nuanced and or hot take about this. I guess I didn't like Jim Knowles' defense specifically. I like the 3 safety defense.
Yeah.
I like the versatility it provides you. I think it gives you unmatched versatility and protection in coverage from a lot of the things that offenses want to do. And if you have a strong defensive line, if you have 4 big physical defensive linemen, you can really suffocate an offense and take away a lot of explosive passing. And you can be versatile in the run game to throw bodies in unpredictable ways at the box and get some tackles for loss. It didn't work here because they didn't have that first part. They did not have the defensive line to do it. But in theory, right, like I think it's a beautiful defense. There's certain aesthetics of defense when you're watching in film. And like Manny Diaz's defense was that once you understood what the chaos was doing, it was beautiful. You could see the rotations, you could see the fill, you could see the zone drops with Jim Knowles' defense. Or, I watched recently Oregon's defense last year. Like some of the coverage rotations are really like they're artistic, they're creative to watch. I really like them. If you know like what's expected and then what happens, like then you're like, oh, you're pleasantly surprised after not seeing the same thing for the 400th time, and it gives your brain a little bit of a refresh. So I liked the defense in theory. It did not work.
No, and it was something that frustrated Penn State fans, and of course in part led to the season Penn State had. All right, T. Frank, I think that'll do it for this edition of BWI Live. You guys will be back talking recruiting tomorrow, I believe, right here on the BWI YouTube channel. Any final thoughts before we roll on out of here on this Wednesday edition?
Yeah, I talk too much. This is what I was talking about yesterday on the show. Like my time management skills are terrible. And also I try to put 6 pounds of show in a 5-pound bag. I've been scouting defensive ends, and I have some film I want to show you, and I have some takes I want to give out for like. We talked about the offensive line. Part of it is going to be like who they see and the challenges they face. Malachi Goodman being a redshirt freshman. What are the defensive ends are going to face? There's a lot of guys to scout, but I am working my way through that, and you can see those film breakdowns on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com on the message board. I'm providing you my updates of what I see on the coaches' film. You can see all of it there. I'm going to talk about it at some point. It might be when we get the top 5, once I actually get it all scouted, but I'm in the middle of doing it. So like a lot of the things I would like to do of like give you an article or talk about it on the show or give you the rundown, like to do it right, it takes enough time to watch the film, and I'm in the middle of that. So sorry that I once again didn't have enough time to talk about it on the show because I talked too long like I'm doing right now on the outro, and also it just takes a lot of time when you're trying to watch that film. So that's coming from me.
All right, looking forward to that, T. Frank. Looking forward to you all joining us again on BWI Live. Don't forget, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check us out over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. To the current subscribers, thank you. If you're not one, get ready for preseason camp with joining for just $1. For Thomas Frank Carr, I'm Greg Pickel. We'll talk to you next time on BWI Live.